do it anyway. So, despite what you may have heard, um, you're now watching the Olympics today. And the main event, is the running long jump because we're going to take a very, very long run into something and then see if we can jump octaves into something else. What I want to work into today is really having to do with where the work enters and where the way enters in one's particular journey. This is important because it's easy to just, I mean, people say, oh, I'm in the work, I've done the work, I'm on the way, that sort of thing. But it's not necessarily the case, is it?
No.
So I want to begin at the far end of things. And like I said, take a nice running leap and see where we can go from here. And the way that I'm going to approach this today has to do with what's been called, or what's been known as the foods, the food diagram. Now, this is my kind of friction and struggle, something that I've come to, in that, originally I was taught that there are 4 foods for the human, which would be the physical food that we eat, the water we drink, the air that we breathe, and the impressions that we take in. I have since kind of pulled water out because in my estimation, anything that's actually a food for the human has to have the opportunity to go through a evolutionary process of transformation. Air does this in the system because of the function that it performs. Obviously, food does, right? You'll know my favorite analogy with food regarding you can't just grab a potato and shove it in your ear and have a brilliant thought. Right? It has to go through an evolution in oneself. So food does, air does, impressions, which is everything that we take in, all the sounds around us, it can, but it doesn't necessarily. But water doesn't. Water is a maintaining function. So I want to kind of tackle things from the very, very beginning and go from there. Stuart, you just joined. I was just explaining that this is going to be the event at the Olympics known as the running long jump. So it's going to be quite a run into things, and then we're going to see if we can hop octaves here. I'm going to switch cameras. All right. Can we see this? See this okay? Okay. So most of you, in fact, I'm pretty certain all of you, sorry, I need to look here even though you're over there for me, have heard of the term hydrogens in this work. Like, we used to say the sky is H12 blue. And to be honest, when I was young and I had first heard that H12 blue type of thing and no one had explained it to me, I thought it was a kind of like the color of a dye, of an artificial dye. Like you look at a package of something and it's yellow number 5. That's what I thought it was. I thought H12 blue. Okay, yeah, sky blue. That's H12 blue. It took many years of really stumbling around in that to understand what that actually means and what a hydrogen is. Now, so before we get into the numbers of anything, I'm just going to go through what the idea of a hydrogen is from the standpoint of this work. For us, we think of, I'm going to zoom in here. Hopefully this does it. Yeah, good. Okay. So for us, we think of a hydrogen like this, right? Where it's got one positive neutron and one proton surrounded by one electron. But this is not the way that everything is in other octaves of the universe. And what I mean by that is that for us, this is the lowest physical expression that we can perceive. If we break it apart any further, it becomes something nuclear, right? Or an energetic explosion. I've given the idea of the ray of creation in this format a couple of times, and some of you are probably familiar with it. But if you take, instead of H3, if you take world 3, you have 3 forces. I'm only going to very mildly come into this bit. You have 3 forces, positive, negative, and neutral. In world number 6, then what happens is it replicates itself, okay? And it causes this inversion. And so you have 6 forces coming together, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they're joined at the middle. Same thing with 12. And so this is like the ray of creation goes through this process of confirmation, where when it doubles itself, and then aggregation when it thickens itself, and then confirmation, aggregation, and so on and so forth. So in world 3, this is what a hydrogen atom, if you can conceive of such a thing, would look like, okay? But when you get down to our world, this is what it's composed of. So we've got these 3 forces here, but I just want you to get a sense of how large that is and what's all contained in it. You've got 1, 3, 6, 9, 12, all the way up to 48 different forces all at play. But we can't break that part down, okay? Once we start doing this, if you were to split this apart and kind of elevate it out of the realms of physical matter into something else, you'll find later that what it releases would be the equivalent. We would experience it as an emotion, but in the ray of creation level above us, that would be the atom, or I'm sorry, that would be the hydrogen atom. You see, so it really has to do with the concept of coarse and fine with things. Now, to go through the journey of this, first of all, I've got to explain that the scales that you're about to be presented with have been adjusted, okay? Because it's not, keep this aspect in mind with the hydrogens and all that. It's not actually like that. It's much, much, much more coarse as it enters us, but the scale is adjusted. Just like if you're playing a musical instrument and you decide to play at a higher octave or a lower octave, adjusting the range of things, that's what we're doing with this. And so I'm going to take you through the process of, you start off by eating some physical food, right? You cook a potato and you begin to eat it, and something in you, something higher in you, begins to act upon that, okay? And so it comes in to the organism as what's known for this example as hydrogen 768, okay? It's a very, very coarse type of thing. And through the process of chewing it and the enzymes that interact with it, it ends up elevating to hydrogen 384. In other words, it's evolved. It's released some of its physicality and become a bit more energetic. It becomes a bit like water in the end, from the standpoint of it interacting with the saliva and whatnot, right? It takes on more of a fluid nature. So you can think of this as like solid liquid gas at this point. So active chewing elevates it to a watery-like state. Once it enters the bloodstream, it does so almost in a molecular state, right? So you could say that that corresponds to the element of air. Now, as we all know, in any kind of octave, there are 2 places where trouble starts. What I mean by trouble is that if you're going do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, there are two places where the octave cannot naturally transition to the next note without some sort of help from the outside. And so in the solfeggio scale, that would be, the first instance would be between the notes mi and fa, or E and F, right? There's no E sharp, there's no F minor. And you can see this if you look at a piano, because you'll see like the white note, black note, white note, black note, white note, and then all of a sudden there's just 2 white notes next to each other. That's called a missing semitone. And it's actually a natural occurrence. It's not invented, but the point is that something from the outside has to come in and kind of knock it into the rest of it to keep it on track. And the thing that does that in the human complex is where the second food comes into play. And the second food would be air, right? You breathe in, you breathe out, and that gives that extra bump to what's happening with the food to be able to allow it to elevate through the rest of the octave in here. So we've got do, re, mi for 768, 384, 192, and then air comes into the equation. And we'll get into what that happens then. But then it's allowed to progress through the rest of its octave naturally. So when it elevates through the force of air, it becomes the electromagnetic aspect. And that would take on the role of hydrogen 96 in a person. Hydrogen 96 is really related to one's health and the electrical defenses one has. Okay, it would actually be the equivalent of the etheric region of the aura. That's that density, that dense aspect. Already for us, it's outside of the realms of something physical, right? In that standpoint, it continues its elevation through various processes and becomes the force of thought at hydrogen 48. And this is where, that potato that you didn't shove in your ear but actually consumed went through several steps of evolution with the assistance of some outside force. And I'm going to say that again, with the assistance of some outside force. And the reason why I'm saying that, or the reason why I'm repeating it, is because it's going to come in to play very significantly later when we talk about these two aspects of thinking differently and the way and what it means. At the next level up, it becomes the force of emotion, and then finally the force of sex, but sex at the level of procreation, not creation itself. And then it hits the second one between C and go, and it cannot go any further. And so that potato has made its journey from something inedible, right, when it wasn't cooked, to something that comes all the way up to give you the force and power of procreation. But here's the interesting thing, and this happens several times throughout. And the big mystery comes at this end here. But the interesting thing is that when air enters the organism, it now sounds a new note of do. Okay, so air comes in at 192, and it goes do re mi, and then it runs into a barrier where it cannot go any further. Now, if it's allowed to go further, then of course it's going to go fa sol la si and come all the way up into this. But realize that if it enters here at air, which is the highest before this first stop here, then its next step at Ray is the electromagnetic aspect, in other words, the etheric layer and part of the aura, and thought, and then it stops there. So now you're starting to see that we have forces in here of different varieties that come from different sources. They sound differently within the system, but they all have the same kind of energy content. You follow so far? Am I making sense? Okay, so air goes do re mi, and then it runs into its blockage. And what happens here, for the most part, this is a bit of a grant, okay? These do re mi on this, but the third food of impressions, or what are impressions? Impressions is, if you take a moment and actually feel the air around you, if you listen to all the sounds that you're not currently hearing in your environment, if you take a sense of the temperature of the colors around the place, these are all impressions that are coming in. But the problem with impressions is that they actually don't have any oomph. Nature gives them to us whether we pay any attention to them or not, right? It's all part of this kind of automatic system in the human. And so we can say when this third food enters into the organism of impressions is that it lacks any kind of vigor. If a person doesn't do something with those, doesn't actually actively try to digest them, that's where it ends. And none of this stuff in the, where is it? In the air octave is really able to proceed, okay? It cannot nourish the soul, which goes along with hydrogen 12, cannot nourish the spirit, hydrogen 6, and the silver and gold aspects, or the galactic and universal aspects of things. And this is kind of the foundation of all religions, what they practice. If you think about kind of the core practices of every religion, many of them have these restrictions on what you can eat, right? And so they put a large emphasis on the first food. You're not allowed to eat meat. You have to be vegetarian. This sort of thing. Others don't care that much. Some religions put a great deal of emphasis around breathing techniques. You have all these ways of breathing especially in some of the like Hindu religion or Hindu aspects or Buddhist or Taoist aspects that augment or emphasize this second food. And then there's the type that tell you how to think, not what to think, but how to think about things. And that would be the kind of the third aspect of the lowest level of a religious process in there. But all of that is just planetary. In other words, the planet needs all of this. It doesn't need anything above and beyond this point. And so because this impressions come into us lacking any sort of vitality, vigor, or force, then something else is required. And what's required is what's known in this kind of path is called work. And the first form of work, see, the thing about this type of work is that it gets into you. I remember when I began this journey many years ago, and I was going to my very first meetings, and it wasn't very long before everything in the world kind of started to change for me. Yeah, I would look at things differently. I would actually start to, the world got a bit brighter for me because I was not just letting things passively pass through me like 99.9% of people do on this planet, but there was a digestion beginning to take place in me regarding what I was perceiving around me, right? And most of you, I'm sure, have had the same experience too. And it begins, so it comes in as impressions, and if you don't do anything with it, that's where it sits. Nothing else happens to you. You're basically literally a Homo sapien, an intelligent animal, right? An intelligent monkey. The second aspect comes to observation, because there comes a point when you have this initial awareness of oneself, or the first stages of awakening, where you begin to have this sense of self in the presence of what it is that you're dealing with. And I don't mean this in a holy way or anything like that. Like standing in this room, there's a part of me that is very much aware, very much alert and keen to the fact that I'm standing here, and that Pierce is walking around doing this thing, right? But there's a part that's kind of has this observation of what's happening to this life as it happens. And that begins a journey. That's where a journey begins, but it is not yet the way. It's only work, because it actually takes quite a bit of effort to get it into oneself to actually maintain that state when you are continuously in that state of being able to observe, or that awareness, I think would be the right term for it. And then the third is consideration. And this also sounds, so impressions, dough. Usually after that, dead. No further opportunity for evolution unless someone does something. If someone comes into contact with a work, then they begin to observe things, both in themselves and in the world around them. And the me, or the third note that comes out of that, is consideration. It's got the word or letter CON in it, right? Which is an indicator of the kind of process. But that is where things begin to digest in oneself. But here's the problem. It goes boom, boom, boom. It goes do, re, mi, and then it stops from there. Because the rule in the universe is that things take 3 steps, and then they need some sort of outside influence in order to propel them into something else. So let's take a minute here. These are the hydrogens. So if you look at hydrogen 12, this is where we started with things and what kind of propelled me off into this. This at its lowest level is the fuel for the act of procreation, right? At the next level up, it's something that nourishes the the soul. And at an even higher level, which we haven't gotten to yet, it nourishes something else, but only if those are actually present in there. It takes the full manifestation of all 3 foods to elevate a person outside of that realm of being just an intelligent ape, to actually doing something and moving forward with it. So I have a couple things written here on the board. And in my estimation, this is just kind of a pondering from this morning. I didn't know what I was going to talk about today. It's just like this, this felt like it would be an interesting thing to work into. But so in my estimation, this is where work comes in. Work on oneself comes in at this level of impressions, and it allows, if one allows it to, at some point in time, the way comes in here to be able to kind of bridge that gap if one is open to it. Okay, so there is the long run into it for the long jump Olympics. I'm going to switch it back and take a pause, take a break for any sort of questions, and see where people sit with this, and then we will do the jump. All right, freezing time. Do the long run, and then you just freeze before the jump. First of all, was it too fast? That was a long, quick run. Like, let's talk about, yeah. Sachin.
I don't think this is too fast. I think for everybody in this group at this point, this is just right. I think
Yeah, okay.
I've got Kimberly sitting next to me, and she's kind of awestruck. She's like, well, nobody explained this to me. But there's going to be a lot of people who are, on that first octave. Like, I personally know I have a lot of things to do with substance control, with habits and all of that. So I've got stuff in me, like I'll drink, I'll smoke, I'll party too much. All of that crap.
You sound like fun to hang out with.
Yeah, maybe. There are times. But so those are things that it's just me. And I think that I'm a little further along than some of the others. But there's going to be a lot of people who have that problem. There's going to be a lot of others who have problems on the next stage. I think that's the majority of Americans. Very materialistic. They don't smoke, they don't drink, but all they think about is work and politics and corporate ladder and all that crap.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to get out of. Very, very difficult. It's harder to get out of. The first one is probably easier to get out of. It's very obvious that those things are bad for you. Okay, it's easy to get out of. But the other stuff is where all the cultural conditioning of our culture comes. Like, hey, get a house, get a car, get a high-paying job, blah, 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 climb the corporate ladder. All that crap is how this works. So how do you... That's the hardest part. So, and I'm just throwing stuff out here.
There it is. Okay. I finally picked up where you were going with this. So first of all, in the manner of doing an actual work or a way, those things aren't nearly as important as far as, whether you smoke or choose to smoke or choose not to smoke, whether you choose to drink or not to drink, whether you eat meat or don't eat meat. They're not actually as important as most fixed religions or repetition leg ions, right, that we talked about. Most of those actually give them, because that was all dealing with how do you get to this point of the first three foods of just being able to encounter a work. Yeah. But if you're lucky enough, and also we talked about the permissions aspect before, that we have this new permission now in ourselves. If you are fortunate enough, I guess is the right word, to encounter a work like this, then you already have this option here. In other words, this is the mechanical aspect, right? This is just the machine doing what the planet says it should do. This is where all of your opportunity lies in here. And you're absolutely right that most people will not do the work, or if they do the work, they'll do it for a little while and then kind of peter out with it. Right? Because it becomes habitual. They haven't had the lesson on habitual or initiative, habit, and new learning. They haven't had that. I really think this is where the Gurdjieff thing and the whole fourth wave thing went off, from the standpoint of it wasn't powered the way this work is. This work actually has a bank of force backing it. And so when you encounter this, tell me, yes or no, since you've been dealing in this, since you've been working in this, has it changed kind of your perception of the world around you?
Definitely has for me.
I was asking you. You're on my screen, so.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. So I got involved last year And then the corporate world got in the way because I got laid off and I was like, I have no money. I have to go back. And I got that sorted out. So now I'm like, okay, now that's fine. This is not it. And so I'm like, I'm back again. And then fortunately you sent that email early this year saying, hey, we're starting it up again. I'm like, ah, this is exactly what I need.
Right. Great.
And, but the lure of the corporate world is still there. And I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I still gotta, pay
The
for the
lure
house.
of what?
The corporate world, the material world or whatever, you want to call it.
Corporal. Yes. Okay.
Still,
Yeah.
still gotta pay the bills. Still gotta pay for the mortgage. I gotta have a roof over my head. Blah blah blah. So that is not going to stop anytime soon. Maybe
Yeah.
never. Who knows?
This is not a monastic way, in any respect of the word. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It doesn't require a convent or a temple or a cutoff type of situation to be able to do this type of work. And the reason why is because any result that one might achieve in a situation like that, where they just completely shun the culture and go to a monastery or whatever the case is, it's always going to result in a weak work from the standpoint of it can't actually face and deal with what is around us in the culture today. If you grew up in a monastery and you never were subjected to things like greed, to things like jealousy, to things like anger, or people honking their horns at you as you walk across the street, or that type of stuff, imagine the shock. Imagine what it would be like to be like dropped into New York City after having grown up in a cave all your life. That cave dweller, in this analogy, might have a great deal of essence, or might have a great deal to their core, but they don't have anything to pit it against. Right? We talked about this just a bit ago in the last session, that life needs to be able to struggle. It needs that friction to be able to do anything. So really, I'm of the impression that those ways are things of the past, that they really probably wouldn't work today. And my evidence that religion in general doesn't work is that if it did, we would live in a very different world, wouldn't we? Because everyone in history, I don't think there's a person here or a person in the world that didn't have, at least with one or two generations back, someone who was very religious, was a practicing this or practicing that, whatever the case is. So you can say that humanity has tried the monastic and temple and religious thing, and it didn't work. Right? So yeah, I actually think it's a blessing if you find yourself in a situation. Here's the thing. Okay, I'm going to go back to this idea of where it all begins, which is the impressions turning into observations. The most difficult place to maintain oneself is at a big box store. You know what I mean by a big box store? I don't know what you guys have there in the UK, but we have like Walmart, and you probably have that as well. But yeah, yes, give me a thumbs up if you know what I mean. Okay. And the reason why it's so difficult to maintain oneself in that is because everything in a store like that has been absolutely 100% engineered to take force from you. You're walking down the aisle, and there's they whether they know the mechanics of it or not, they use color, they use symbol, and they use number, three of the most powerful forces in the universe, to suck force out of you as you're walking down. So you'll find your eyes like attracted to this, attracted to that, attracted to this. That's on sale, this sort of thing. And you will completely forget about you at that point in time. I mean, I'm speaking from personal experience, because that's one of the most difficult places to maintain this kind of feeling of being present.
This is 100%, right? I mean, I know my weaknesses are the magazine with the Katy Perry picture on it, or the beef jerky dish thing on it, or the chapsticks. All it's like color and sound, and well, not sound so much. They don't use it so much in the store. Sometimes they do. Yeah. I'm sure it's the same thing in the UK. All you've got on the cash out register is tabloids.
Yeah.
In all these bold pictures and bold colors and bold words, it has like doesn't your eyes are going to go there no matter what. It just you just can't help it. They're in front of you and they're very like full of impressions. Lot of impressions, bold words, large letter words, provocative pictures and all of that. It's just can't help it. That's how this works. Well,
I mean, as a gent, you can't even stand up and pee in a public place without being advertised to, right? Because right there in front of the urinal is usually some sort of advertisement for something or another. Now you would think that, there's some place in the universe that might be just kind of devoid of that and sacred, but it's not. Yeah. But here's the thing, Sachin, is that it's one thing to wish that the culture was different than it is, right? But there comes a point in time in one's journey where they just have to say, okay, that is the way it is. How do I actually use that to my advantage instead of, longing for some peace? We won't find peace the way this is engineered, the way this culture is engineered. But you can find it within. So I want to get back to, is it clear on at least my impression of the level of difference between the work and then where the way enters things? Because that octave of impressions that just comes in automatically, I mean, you can't shut it out. Even if you close your eyes, you're still going to feel temperature and whatnot. Yeah? But that has there is nothing in the human that can elevate it beyond that do, re, mi type of thing. Something has to come in from the outside. And this is where I think creation is constantly trying to get our attention and constantly sending folks down here, Well, we'll try a guy that preaches peace, okay? And then we'll try a guy that preaches war, and we'll try a guy that preaches this, and they're just constantly bombarding humanity with something to try to push us through that aspect.
And then we get Donald Trump. Don't forget that.
Right. Well, if it wasn't him, it'd be someone else, right?
They're not employing the right advertising executive.
Yeah. So where do you want to go from here? I mean, like I said.
The question.
Yeah.
Are you actually saying that up until the first shock point, you had a series of natural events, but you're saying that the way actually occurs at that first shock point? Is that what
I
you're
think that's
saying?
the entrance of it. It's got to be equivalent to a food. Yeah. What would you say?
You would have to be something like that, because you'd have to make clear what's understood by the meaning of the way, because it's something. One of those shocks is inward and one is outward, but it doesn't mean to say that the order is still the same, because the first shock can be an outward signal and the second one an inward, or it can be inward to begin with and outward as the second. So if you're talking about the road of development, then the first one should be inward, shouldn't it? And the second one outward, because that's, how would you say, the demonstration of that development.
Yes. And what you remind me of is that
What you're saying is that development occurs by that first impression. You never get a second chance with a first impression, see?
Yeah.
So
But
how
I think-
do you come to the way? Because if it's the same process for all, then there has to be a criteria that decides whether it's a way or something else. So what is that? Is that something in the person? Is it something that's around the person, or is it something that they go to, like you're sort of suggesting or highlighting as an example, church, the church process? Because 400 or 500 years ago, they were the way.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? But that was only because of the nature of cultural life at the time.
Yeah.
So something had to house what the culture never had. But it would be considered religious, wouldn't it? And it was also, you know, given the fact that the way of life said you were either the lesser or the owner. Serfdom, slavery, and so on.
Yeah. Well, and that indicates that the way is constantly evolving, and it's something that should be pursued, chased, or tried to latch oneself to.
I'm thinking more about the fact that, you know, I've met some extraordinary people in my life. Way people.
Mhm.
People who were way people, not because of the efforts of the work that I did, or things like the Eamon, etc., or Vercel, but were by other means way people. Yet the conversation between myself and them was not only enlightened, but animated far beyond a cultural view. So do you think that maybe sometimes, you know, like there'll be a boat that pulled into San Francisco Harbor, maybe in 1736 or something, that had a whole boat full of slaves picked up off Africa and Sri Lanka and places like that, and that maybe one or two of them were way people?
Yes, I do, because I don't think that
Then it doesn't
it's
mean
never
that
been without a way person.
society. So that goes to say that society isn't that criteria, is it?
No.
So what is the criteria of the person before a way event and the person after the way event? Or you could even say the person at the event itself, because somewhere the two have to meet, don't they? See, if it is way, why did they call it way? And why do they call a bicycle bicycle? Yeah, it doesn't. The word bicycle doesn't describe what you do with it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I know people that have turned bicycle wheels into propellers, fans, and things of this kind.
Sure. Yeah. Electric generators. Yeah.
So if it's going to be an occurrence of your own, it's going to happen within you, then it has to relate to you somewhere along the line. So you can't buy it in the shop. You can't write off for it. You can't get it off the internet.
Yeah.
So you have to. There's an actual physical, very real encounter that takes place between you and it, and there's a lot of people looking for it too.
Are there?
Yes, there are. There's thousands of them. They go off looking for the mysteries. Whatever the reason for journeying around the world, etc., all right, looking for the truth, search for truth, joining religious processes because they can't accept the nature of cultural life and things of this kind. These are all various attempts of people to actually put their finger on the way itself or join something of that kind or ilk of work, but very few find it. Even Jerdef said this, since you mentioned him earlier, right? So did Ospensky. So did a lot of others. But they weren't even necessarily on the way, though, weren't they? And would you say Ospensky was on the way? A way man? Or a way person?
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know. I think he intellectualized and beat it to death intellectually.
Well, I mean, I had a conversation with a woman in New York who's running a group of people out there, 30 of them, and nothing to do with anything, Eamon or this or Verso or anything like this. And the first thing she said, you've got to understand I'm a way woman. I thought, oh, really? What does that mean? Because it didn't necessarily reflect in her work. From what I heard of it, there was nothing of the way in it whatsoever, but she herself claimed the title of it, right? You, za. I was waiting for you, Mr. Sir.
Me.
Yes.
Ah.
You weren't listening, were you?
Yes,
I
I
sat
was.
like a dummy saying all that, and you weren't bloody listening. No, you weren't.
I was.
Yeah, you weren't.
No, I think the most poignant question, or the most poignant point, I suppose, was that it has to be surrounded by a criteria. And
Right.
the first aspect of the criteria that occurs to me in this is that if you want to join the future, you have to be like it. You have to be like the future, because it's no good whatsoever. Absorbing the past if you want to be the future. Yeah. And so
What do you mean by the future? Because
well,
isn't the way? I mean, the way is a standard edition of being esoteric, isn't it?
no,
Or being
no,
occult,
it's a
or
secret.
being religious. They all call it the way.
It's a moving train. That's what it
What's
is.
your way? Tell us about your way.
Well, I see.
You claim a way man. I mean, you've got practices that really explain what that way is about yourself is, haven't
Yes.
you? Beliefs, your standards, your principles, not necessarily from some kind of moralistic, high-standing, viewpoint. About morals, you turn tails and run when you hear that word. There's no more immoral person than the person who claims they're immoral. Who throws the first stone, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have those things. So if someone was any of the wiser, or had any personal experience of such an event, they would spot that in you rather than your looks or your money or your dog. I don't care, whatever happens to come along with you.
Right.
But you would be somewhere if they had ability that came with it. They would see something of it around you. Yes, because you would be carrying it with you wherever you went and whatever you did. Seeing as that would be the issue of you, wouldn't it? A purpose of life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
To pursue that work from within it.
Yep. It's the hallmark of it.
So you become the criteria yourself.
Well, based on the assemblies within, though. That's the thing, and they have to be intentionally put there, not adopted. They can be adopted, but they still have to be worked. What I mean is, like, you can come across someone, like yourself, Orman. I can encounter someone like you. Yeah, like you. I can encounter someone like you and recognize in you that there are things that you've added up and worked out and ways that you go on and so on and so forth that would be very useful for my life as a developing human on this planet. But it's no good for me to go, yes, I like all this stuff unless I actually do it myself too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
it isn't a question of that. It's a question of your achievement within it, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
So you would want the best possible chance, wouldn't you? I mean,
absolutely.
Most of my life I've spent when someone blew the whistle, when everybody set off running up the track, I had to start 100 yards behind. That wasn't allowed. I mean, there's too many problems. The irony of life was chasing me. Sachin just spoke about that, didn't he? Hey, lost your job at the wrong time, right? Yeah. Had to go and get another one, this sort of thing. It's all sent to try us out, isn't it? But before that's the meaning of life, isn't it? Before. So one of the aspects here is that picking up a work of this kind, the one that you're explaining at this time, which I must admit was very good. I like the way you did that. These are the winning features that you really need, or you hold on to, because as time goes on, you don't have to prove them right necessarily. It's the fact that you find out that that's how you're doing it. That's what makes it work. Yes, that's how it works, and you can't change that. You can't change the fact of it.
Well, this brings
Because
up one of the biggest
science
dangers.
can't do it. Can't
This
outdo
brings
the
up-
rules. It runs by.
Yeah, but this brings
What-
up one of the
what?
biggest dangers in this type of work, where
That is-
it always seems to go wrong.
Meeting me.
Huh?
Meeting people like us. Stop nodding.
No. The biggest danger, in my estimation, of this type of work, and one that I've seen happen time and time again, not just talking about the Eamon or anything, but going all the way back to Zoroastrianism, if you will, whatever the case might be, is that people try to stamp it upon themselves and emulate it instead of living it and working it. And the example that I give is where I went terribly wrong as a young man when I encountered this sort of work. I was so, 6 months in, I was so gung ho about the work, and I thought I knew absolutely everything. No one could ever, catch me out or trick me or whatever, because I had an answer for anything. I talked to someone about reincarnation. Oh, I know all about reincarnation. Someone talks about whatever the case, religion. I know all about religion, and I could spout it out. I could be a really cool parrot, right? Or a really cool mirror, just reflecting everything that I thought I had learned. But the fact of the matter is that I didn't know shit. I literally didn't know. It was all just a copy, an emulation, a facsimile of.
So there came a point where that changed.
Absolutely, there came a point when
So
that changed.
must have been a shock point.
It was devastating, to be honest. Yes. Yeah.
So you had to then struggle for the truth of something.
Mm-hmm.
So the signal from before isn't the same as the signal afterwards. The impression is different. Yeah.
No, because now instead of reflecting, I radiate when I do this.
Radiating.
I radiate the content within myself about the work that I've done instead of reflecting someone else's content.
I think you absorb some of it and you learn from it, and then you boil it down, and then you radiate. So you can't take the energy in, refine it, and put it out.
Yeah.
If it's worth putting out.
Yeah, but in any impression, you have an influence. You have an influence, an energy, or a power, and they all do different things. So one of those three things is going to feature that impression. And so you radiate an impression of yourself. So a sensitive will be able to shake your hand or listen to what you say, and then come to terms or come to know things about you that you didn't say, didn't tell, didn't describe, didn't show.
But only if they have a bit of it in
hide.
themselves.
Yeah. Well, you can't hide from the truth of self in that. And that's more of a true art than reading someone's past life and all that sort of crap, right?
Yes.
So where do you learn those arts then? Because that then, I suppose, would be what you would call part of the work of the way. So what is the way itself when you come around to? What kind of an impression comes as a way person to a way person that carries such things within it? But I'm talking about a more developed or greater influence than the norm or energy. Influence carries knowledge.
Yes.
Yes, and knowing is the practice of that knowledge. Yes.
Yes.
Whether you work it out, do it or not, knowing is always present in something that carries a knowledge. But it's not present in something conscious. You get something else. You get a cognizance of things, right? And so that impression now enables cognizance of self. That means conscious behavior is possible. So this is a conscious way now, right? And then it goes even further than that, because the power of it is what animates the whole affair. And so now you've got an animated way, but that's termed from the possibility of culture as an illumination of light, right? Because animation glows, it shines, it radiates. But somewhere along the line, there's got to be a point where before it wasn't, and then it was. And that's a point where a mechanism different from the norm occurs, an event. Yes. So I'm saying that in the first instance, there has to be a series of approaches, works done in the person themselves, which is what you're highlighting here, that bring you to those particular events. Otherwise, you can't awaken. You follow what I'm saying here?
I do indeed.
You don't become the thing, you will fail. So whether you call yourself it or not won't make a difference, because if you are, you are, and if you're not, you're not.
Yes.
Right?
You know, there's something in sales actually that is very relevant to this, and there's an expression that they teach salespeople. It's go first. In other words, if you want the person to buy whatever it is that you're selling, then you have to buy it first, instinctively or emotionally or whatever the case might be on the inside. Now, the way that this applies to this work is that God and creation and the planet and all that are only going to give you so much so far, right? You get to this wall in here where the final thing that life gives you is impressions. But if you don't actually take the opportunity and time to digest them, to chew them, to work them, to disintegrate them, and allow them the opportunity to evolve, then this way can never touch you, because it's not going to just, otherwise development would be automatic, but it's not. You have to actually work it. And so what I mean by go first is that creation is not going to force evolution upon you. It might force extinction upon us as a species, but it's not going to force evolution. We have to go first, just like the plant has to make that effort to get out of the ground, and then it finds the sun there that will.
You've got to put into it first.
You
got to put into it first.
Yeah.
Same as that, the pattern of behavior. So you get an idea at 100 units of energy.
Yes.
And you go crazy. You start thinking about, I'm going to set up shop. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a fortune, blah, blah. And by the time it comes round to it, you wear out the energy that came along with that, the impression, the idea.
Yeah.
Now it lays dormant in you. Say, oh, well, it's an idea that's not going to work now, because you run out of oomph in it.
Yep. Yeah.
So, and it's not until you put the oomph back in it that that idea begins to live again. Yes. Isn't that the same with everything else?
Absolutely. And that again, I come full circle back to the idea of the biggest danger in this type of work is because there is so much. I mean, yes. What we have, what we contain, or what we are custodians to in this work is massive from a knowledge and being and understanding and development standpoint. I mean, it's absolutely, I've got to say, it's probably got more content in it than anything in the world could anywhere has or ever probably did have. And it's so easy to just be a connoisseur of knowledge, because this is how our culture trains us to be, right? We go to school. I can repeat. I'm an engineer by trade. I can repeat, math formulas. X sub c equals 1 over 2 pi fc. Do I know how they got there? No. I think that's the formula for resonant frequency, right? Pounded into my head. Do I know how they discovered that X sub c equals 1 over 2 pi fc? No, because I've never done the work of it. So do I know it? No, I don't know it. I can parrot it, I can repeat it, but that's not going to do in a way. That's not going to do in a work. That will get you nowhere, absolutely nowhere.
So so what you're saying really was, if you didn't get your degree, you wouldn't be written into the family will, right? You'd be surprised how often that occurs in life, really. I knew a guy who was bursting into tears, right? He was a brilliant chemist. And I said, what's the matter? He said, the bastards, excuse my language, he said, the bastards, how dare they? I said, what are you talking about? He said, my parents. He said, all I ever wanted to do was play the violin. And they forced me to become a chemist. He said, I hate chemistry. I never hated anything more in all my life. He said, but there was the difference between, you know, the house they live in, the money they got, the car when they, you know what I mean?
So the question
Fred,
in
you're
that is
kicking out
he
the
a
family
violin
fortune.
player or is he a chemist? What is he
Well,
really?
that is it, isn't it? You see two different people in there. There's your basis for schizophrenia, I suppose. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if he made the grade before the time that the will was read, I don't think the will would be of interest anymore, would it? What would he naturally, like a duck goes to water, what would he naturally turn to?
Yes.
That would be the violin, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
if you, therefore, are in touch with your real self, what would you naturally take to? Because people like you, Pierce, like myself, like others here, turn towards the way. That way is about what we are and what we become because of what we are, right?
Yes.
I don't think evolution has anything to do with culture. They name it wrongly. It does have something to do with the nature of life itself. So the nature of life evolves, whether the culture does or not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there are structures, yes, programming.
I had a discussion earlier with a couple folks in this meeting today about religion, and we kind of came to the idea that once upon a time, the religion of a single cell was to become multicellular, because
To become
multicellular, right? Because if you think about it, if everything around is just single cells, and suddenly one becomes cellular organism, that's the religion of the future for it, right? And then from there, it spreads on and spreads on and spreads on. And so it causes me to think, and this is why I wrote it on the board a bit ago, that, you know, you need to be like the future, not like the past. And that.
Well, that's the second rule of a salesman, isn't it? Act as though it's already happened. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Act as if, right.
No good going in there thinking you've not got the sale, is it? You go in there thinking you've got the sale, you stand more of a chance. It's what radiates across, isn't it? The way you knock on the door. This is a lesson of Chick Webster, isn't it? You ever heard the lessons of Chick Webster? He said, if you go up to that door and you knock on that door with reservations to disturb them, not too much. You know, when they open the door, you've lost the sale. But you got that door and you go, it radiates through the entire house and you get that response from them according to the way in which it arrived.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Kind of dramatic, that, isn't it? You know what I mean? Is your life dramatic?
Yeah, sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. I think drama.
How about anybody else's life? How's yours, Sachin? Is it dramatic? I'm not talking culturally. I mean, do you have these events? You know, do you see things? Do you know things? I mean, do you run in any of the abilities that, you know, doing this kind of work is supposed to bring about? That a lot of people say doesn't, and yet they'd be standing there denying it happens, and it's happening right next to them. Yeah, where I used to live in a country, I mean, there was an elemental route along the side of this field. That's what they do. They run around in fields. I mean, that's not exactly the case, but it's like that, right? Oh, I don't believe in all that bloody nonsense. And there's one passing right by him at the same time, you know. I mean, how do you, as a way person then, you call yourself way then, because you got that bit extra, huh? Is that it? The way? That bit extra, you know?
That works.
How do you relate to the world from that point of view, that the very thing that they deny is the very thing that they're standing within, isn't it? You know, or they're standing next to, or is passing them by at the time. I mean, it's so like that. We are so unintelligent about these things, really. Yet we call ourselves clever, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, you have it's terrible, isn't it?
So I guess the next question is, if we assume that it's there, how do we go get it? How do we chase it? How do we hook our wagon to this train?
Exactly the right kind of question, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes. How do you ask yourself that? Because what's fortunate about this particular moment is that there are people who know.
Mhm.
But you know, those slaves on that ship had no chance at all, was it? They had to be what they were to
Right.
keep it, which means it was their own personal endeavor of life that kept them within it. And so their struggle would have been to retain what they already had against a mountain of difference in the outside nature of their living. So people wouldn't allow it. And that's what religion did for hundreds of years, because this kind of conversation would have had us all burnt at the stake 200 years ago, right? We would all be ashes at this moment.
Holy ashes, though.
But it wouldn't stop the priest nicking a little bottle of wine here and there, would it? Come on, seriously.
Would be some highly developed ashes.
Yeah, right. Yes, I agree.
No, so okay, so there's that aspect too. Then not only do you have to know that there is a way and a work, but you also have to know where to find it, and you also have to have an ecology wherein it can happen.
Yes, and also you've got to be prepared to fight for it yourself.
Yeah,
Because no one can do it for you.
that's absolutely right.
You
Yeah,
had
and
to
that
do
goes
it
back
by
to my.
yourself, didn't you? You did it by yourself.
I sure did. Yeah, and still am.
You said so
Right?
yourself,
It's never a
didn't you? You
like
said-
I'm done. Yeah.
And yet you
That's it.
find more and more and more of it. It never stops, does it? It goes on and
No,
on
it
and
doesn't. No.
on. Right.
Yeah. It's here's the thing. I think people think of this work sometimes as a product when in fact it's a process. You will never have the product of this work if you're doing it right. The product might happen to you on the outside. You know, you become more clairvoyant, you become more this, you become more that, kind of on the outside. Yes, that all happens. But the minute one says, I have arrived, they've already gone off the track, because it's not an outcome, it's a process. And as long as God grants you the right to keep inhaling and exhaling, then yeah, keep chasing it.
Who's God?
Yeah. Right.
That's a dangerous subject, isn't it? God.
Yeah.
You know,
Questions for that guy.
Yes. People kill each other. They do. They kill each other over that, don't they?
No, that's Pierce's cultural conditioning. He's been conditioned to say God.
Well, you know, it's cultural life, isn't it? I mean, Pierce is right. You know, there's various aspects. I mean, like in England, you see, when the black man turned up in England, people used to spit for good luck, because that was what it meant to them. It's true. I'm not joking. It's very serious. Eventually, you know, they looked down on English people because they blew their nose on a piece of material and put it in their pocket. And yet the English people looked at the Africans because they were dirty, because they spat on their front room floors. You know, it's culture, isn't it? It's not the human to human. It's culture within the human to human, right? And this is where the problem is. Because, you know, I mean, there was a guy out there today on the street. There he is, taking his children around, and his wife following 3 feet behind, covered in a black sack. Yes. You know, but he believed, you know, that they believe in, you know, vaginal mutilation. That is pretty to them. But it's pretty awful for us. You know, but the Christians are just as bad. So you got the same thing again in religion, haven't you? If you see what I'm saying, because the Christians say that's what's wrong about them. And yet, you know, Christianity used to kill their firstborn. I don't know if you know that. It was the Romans that stopped the Jewish people doing it as well. So who's right? Who's right? That's the thing. That's where I stood up. You're going to have to find what's right yourself. You've got to decide that yourself. But how do you decide what's right? There's only one way.
That's
you
easy.
can.
That's easy.
Yes. Go on in.
It's by what works.
Well, Well, yes. I mean, that's a cheated answer. You're right.
I know.
But that's a
I know.
cheated answer. I mean, come on, seriously. There's somewhere along, isn't that why we do work on the laws? I mean, you know,
Look, if I could develop, if I could self-develop by standing on my head, I would be doing it right now. Right? It's just whatever works. But
standing
the
on
thing
the
is,
next to you, Piers. Yeah.
people put things in the wrong box because in our culture and society, no one has ever had the lesson, which they should have had when they were about 5 years old, that things go with things. Certain things go with certain things. And in our confused, mixed up life of everything being mixed into the same bucket, we tend to put everything in that same bucket. So we put our spirituality where we put going grocery shopping, and we put our family with work, and we put, you know, like everything is going into the same bucket because no one has ever decided for themselves, not no one, few ever decide for themselves that they're going to have a bucket for this that's not that, right? And so people culturalize religion. It's a very big thing here in America. All these churches pop up all over the place, and they're basically converted movie theaters where, you know, they stand up on stage and they've got a guitarist and a rock band and everyone's singing and, you know, having a great time. I mean, it's, if you didn't know any better, you would say that you're at a rock concert, not a church, right? And
well, you've got to ask yourself the question too, you know, do crocodiles believe in God? I mean, they're sneaky little sods, aren't they? They creep up on you and, you know, you get your bum bitten by one of those, it really hurts. Yeah. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you ask the crocodile, it'll still look at you as though you didn't. So what about polar bears?
Well, see, that's their religion, isn't it? I mean, they don't have religion, but if they did, you would be their religion because you represent as their next meal, their opportunity to be in the future. Maybe.
Because ultimately, the way it normally goes is that your ultimate moment is meeting that God, isn't it? Isn't it? So anything you don't do towards that end is against your purpose of life or your belief of life. But beliefs of life, when does the belief stop and you become what you believe in? Huh?
Yes.
So how does one grow up to those facts? Because there is a growing up more than a development involved in it, isn't there? Especially if you have to stand for it yourself. Wouldn't you say? You've had a lot of experience of that because you've had some tremendous struggles. I know something of your life.
Yeah.
Very brave man, this, I tell you. And you lived through a lot of things. But you only lived through because of the tenacity of yourself. Right?
Yeah.
So learning didn't help you there, did it? And you didn't find a school teacher rescuing you. Hmm?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that what is foundational in the work you do? Because there are basics for that, isn't there? Primaries. This is where you learn to do this. This is what these lessons are. You learn about it. You take it, find out about it, work on it, and you come to some understanding about what it actually is rather than who or how it is. Yes?
Yeah.
And if you have that tucked up under your belt, so to speak, you're armed with the ability to take the next step. But then you've got to discover it yourself in the actuality of life out there in the great jungle, because you'll meet it somewhere along the line. But then you also begin to refine and develop yourself, which means that you will begin, not because you've done it, but because something sparks something else off in you. Things that aren't dead, but just dormant. And so you begin to see things and you didn't do a damn thing to that, except you altered something over there, which brought about that event over here. And now you're bemused because you keep seeing those things, and it's no good going to a psychologist because he'll tell you you're frigging nuts. That's what he'll say. The last psychiatrist I went to, he said, lay down. He said, now, tell me your life. So I said to him, like, well, okay, then I hated my school teacher when I was 11, you know, when I left school. I hated work when I started work. And when I was 18, my girlfriend left me. And at the end of the session, he said to me, I know. I said, well, come on in, tell me what's wrong with me. He said, well, it's very obvious, isn't it? Yeah, you hated your school teacher when you was 11, you know, and your girlfriend left you as 18. It doesn't help, does it? Just an answer that doesn't say anything. So do you think that's anything to do with that that tarot card, you know, the searcher, where he's wearing a pack of problems on his back, isn't he?
Yeah, quite
Going
possible.
off, doing it all the wrong way, looking for the truth and things like that.
Right.
But what are you in it? See, this is where you count, isn't it? Right? Yeah, I'll join you on that. Mine's gin, really. I put a colour in it so no one would know.
I have an inclination right now.
Get drunk.
I have an inclination right now, and the inclination is, instead of talking about this, can we show these fine people what we mean? And the way that I would like to try this is for you to ask me a question that you know, based on where I'm at in my level of development, I can't answer. In other words, I'm asking you to put me in the spotlight and put me on the spot, Orman, if you're willing, and they can watch me struggle, because that's what this work is actually about. If you all will forgive me, because I struggle with things too, right? I don't, this is not, I'm not on a pulpit and I'm not preaching. Huh?
It's possible, but I mean, that's an interesting turn. You see, right. I'm up to it. I say it's fine. It's not a problem. But I'm just curious as to the sudden turn there.
The sudden turn comes from my observation that our society is based on a lot of yapping and very little doing when it comes to learning something. And so my thinking is that if someone can watch a man like me struggle and see the process I go through to come to something, that maybe that frequency will set a different tone for future work.
So
hold on, is this, do you want to see this or no? With other people here.
So yeah, I mean, I think this is super, super valuable. I think from where I am, I just want to say, don't make it so difficult that it'll completely bounce over. Like, okay, your level and where I am is like, come on, you guys gonna start talking something, and you guys will like, okay, half of it.
Well, how about the fact of, see, just take a look at something that everybody suffers from and would mostly deny the fact of it. And that's about your ideology of life, right? You all have one. Now, if I was to say to you that, you know, ideology isn't consequential to your existence, yet you live most of your life and its direction by an ideology of self. Now, that can be installed in you through your education. It can be installed in you through your indoctrination, your parents, and things of this kind. So how does the fact of you being your own person relate to the fact that you're not your own person when you carry an ideology? I don't have an ideology of life.
Overriding.
So for me, I have no ego to motivate it with. I've got proof of that, actually. Do you know, I must be some, you see, the thing is, I once went into this insurance agency and there was 4 or 5 people I knew there because there was some things we needed to sort out with the insurance policy. And before I got in there, there was someone sitting in this place here now with you all that was there. And you know what he said when I was about to come into the room? He said, listen, everybody, you're about to meet the only man in the world who has absolutely no personality whatsoever. Is that true or not?
Totally true. Totally true.
Well, there you see. That was it, isn't it? You know, what were they using to carry themselves on? I wasn't. But you see, what was important for me was they knew nothing about. They didn't understand. How can someone live without some kind of personality of self? Huh? They're based in some kind of ego of self, based in some kind of ideology of self. So how do you work the way into the very core of yourself where it should be based, at the very center of yourself?
Well,
If you're going to have to go into conflict with the ideology that you carry in your life day and night, you wake up with it, you go to bed with it, you sleep with it, you run with it, you drink with it, you eat with it, you do everything with it, and yet you deny you've got one. Because being challenged means you're exposed, right? How does one live without such a requirement of cultural life?
well, I think the word itself is really quite presumptuous in the beginning. I wrote it up there because it starts with the word I, and it
Oh,
assumes.
hang on. I was going to ask you before you said this. Hang on, you jumped in front of me there. Hang on. I was going to say, you've got to accept the fact that you have, right at the very core of yourself, an ideology.
Yes.
And that ideology is what?
Well,
Because it's very visible.
it's the divinity of oneself, but I don't think most people have that out, can find that, because what I said about it being a presumptive word is that it assumes that there's an I to begin with. And there isn't an I to begin with in most people until they've done the work of actually having an I. Whatever a deology is, it's presumptive to say I within that. Most of the time in our culture, it's a someone else deology, if you follow. It's a you deology. It's a, I got this from someone else deology, whatever a deology is.
But you don't argue the point. You don't clear the question by demolishing the word, do you? Hmm?
No, but I think it's
You
important to draw a
can't chase the
separation.
moon up a canal because you'll never catch it. And in the same way, what happened to the words you said 5 minutes ago? They're gone. They're not here now. They've been showered away into a mass of others.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you still say those words based upon the very thing that was said 5 minutes ago. Now, I'm saying that that is your ideology. Now, I'm not bringing into this the question of right or wrong.
No.
I'm talking about what is. What is doesn't deal in right or wrong. Like you said, its main feature is that it works in what is, which means it does what it says on the tin. Do you know? You kind of understand that?
Yes.
Yeah, you pick up a tin of paint tin, and they say, well, what does it do? It says it does what it says on the tin. Yeah, you follow what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
you threw this out. I didn't.
No, I thank you for it. I like, I practice what I
Doesn't make me
preach. I want the
clever.
struggle.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And the answer is what?
So yeah, right. I mean, I think what really occurs in me is an ideology, if you want to say it in its truest form, is that divinity of self. But everything else,
Divinity of self.
The divinity of self, the core, the
divinity
creational
is not core. Divinity is something that you amass with your works. So the way itself extends beyond planetary level. You made that virtually clear when you were saying about, like the level of the moon is 96 as an example, and the planet's 48, and the sun is 24, and the stars are 12, right? And you have these different octaves of esoteric learnings that go on, but that's really the numbers of a core.
Mhm.
So you've got planetary cores. I mean, cores being what you would call a soul from the cultural point of view. But there's no such thing, as far as I'm concerned, as a soul. It's, if there is, it's to do with the process. And that process is the process of spirit. You collect enough of it, you become spiritual.
Mhm.
A spirit is a fuel, right, that enables you to do more than your own higher emotions would ever allow you to do. You see? And so because you can only make higher emotions, you can't make any more. So what happens is, as a good example, and I guarantee this has all happened to every single person here, you'll be sitting somewhere and feeling as though you're wearing some kind of hat. Right, and what it is, it's what's known as an Amin Ra. Now, an Amin Ra is the golden ball scarab of ancient Egypt.
Amen.
Amin Ra. Did I say Amin? Didn't I?
Well, it is Saturday.
Sorry, I can't help
Amen.
it. My name's Amin,
Sunday.
isn't it?
Sunday,
That
Sunday,
was
Sunday.
A natural slip of the tongue.
You have to throw in an amen if you're going to speak
Oh yeah,
about
well,
amen
I always
raw
thought,
on a
they
Sunday.
should have said, instead of saying Amen at the end of it, they should say Amen.
Yeah.
I'll send him a bill for it, or something. I mean, anyway, the Amen Ra.
Yeah.
And that is an entity, an animated entity that is still present on this planet. It was manufactured by the ancient Egyptians. And it's still, and when ancient Egypt ceased as such, it found itself wandering the world. But it was something that was manufactured within the work of a way. Now, if you have way, or you've got way content or spirituality in yourself, it'll come along and sit on your head. And what it does is it exchanges a higher emotion that you cannot personally make. You don't have a high enough process in exchange for your crap, your lower emotion, because it can't make lower emotion. But it uses that to shield itself. It's a physical form for it. So this is a reciprocal thing between yourself, something higher, or for it, something lower. But they don't know about how are you going to get to find that sort of thing out? Yet there's more than that. There are dozens of these kinds of things that live not only in the astral light, but in the ethereal domains as well, light, etc., that have an interaction with our life all the time. And what you radiate by what you contain within you will determine whether they approach you or not.
Should we be so lucky to be eaten by an elemental?
Yes, carefully. Sometimes you'll see such things around him. One is which is a small elemental life form that associates with him because of what he is in himself, the entity of self. But that wouldn't happen to the guy down the road, that guy walking up the road down there, because I live in town, I see everything, right? Because there's nothing in it that can be reciprocal between that entity and yours. But that entity doesn't have an ideology of life. It's not manufactured from any kind of cultural, education, learning, stress, or whatever. Even from your transient tree, because even your transient tree has an ideology that belongs to the family way of things, right? You say you said it in your life. Oh, I never went out to play when I was younger with that lot. They're like this, and that's because they are all like that. The whole bloody family's like it, which means they've all got the same, ideology sitting in there. They all have the same view of it. And ideologies make cultures. So how does one, if what I am saying is right, diminish the ideology and replace it with what then becomes your divinity?
Okay.
And your divinity is accrued by what it is that associates with you because in ancient times, the Amun Ra was a semi-god.
Yes.
You become godlike, hence the divinity, you see?
Mhm.
That's how that happens.
Well, so yeah, it I think it begs the question is what sort of efforts does one need to make to find themselves in a position where they are being eaten by an angel,
That's right.
Because everything
Eaten by
eats
an
and
angel.
excretes.
You can't say that and walk away from that. They'll chase you for months
Yeah.
after that one. I'll
Mic
tell you.
drop. Yeah, no.
Yeah, you know, I once made a 14 Arabs run, you know. I did. I ran and they ran after me. So you've got to be careful how you say this.
Yeah,
because that might be the love of their life, their angels, you know. Have you got an angel on your side? Yes, you know, that kind of thing. Hello,
Well-
we've got visitors there. Look, they bring an whole family. That's all right. Where's the cat, the dog, the budgie?
No, what I mean by that, because obviously just saying that and then mic drop and walk away sounds quite horrific. What happened to him? He was eaten by an angel, but no, it's not like that because the everything eats and everything excretes,
Yeah.
right? And it begs the question, because the human is such a complex, multifaceted processing machine on one level, that we are capable of actually eating and excreting into the culture. This is why the culture continues to be fed, right? If
They want you to process culture all the time. I mean,
yeah,
you make
right.
more culture today for tomorrow, and they continue because you're making their culture for them, right?
Yes, it happens like this. I know this is, I'm sorry, my art is absolutely incredible. It took years to get there, so please forgive me. But
Give me
as a machine, right, we're constantly in the flux or in the flow of all the frequencies that are out there. So on this side of the machine called the human, you have things like joy, you have things like greed, you have things like religion, you have things like trying to catch a taxi, you have the tax of stress of taxes, you have God, you have all of this stuff coming in, and it's all flowing through all the time. Now, if you have a particular assembly in yourself based on your electrical content, and I'm just going to draw them as bubbles around this man or lady, then you can process these things. But then what you do with it is really where this goes, because if you process something that comes into you and you're actually able to manufacture something greater out of it, in other words, the process of digestion of something, then you can set yourself up in a position where you become food for something like an angel or an elemental or any number of electrical life forms that offers an enhancing exchange between you and it. And they will hang around you if you do, right? I mean, things hang around their food, don't they? Or if you process down into the culture and you get a little bit of greed and you enhance and amplify it and pump into it, then you're pumping into this bank in the astral light called greed. And guess what's going to happen? More of it will come to you, right? The more you we're food. We're on everything is food in the universe. Everything is food for something. We are in the unique situation of actually having a choice of what we are food for and what we will actually interact with. And this comes down to standards. I think it does.
Comes down to
standards. What you will not feed.
Well, you develop your standards out of that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. All right.
Well, what makes you sick, you don't touch again, that's one way. The other thing is this also applies to your mental life as well, besides your emotional one. And besides your blood life, besides your astral life, your ethereal life,
we're
animated
multifaceted,
life, right? So actually, what you've just described is a criteria to which all life has to, whether it likes or not, respond, right?
Yes.
Now that's true esoteric knowledge. Now, Jerdef said exactly the same thing as that. And I know you didn't get it from that, but the way in which he put it, which is how Spensky explained it, is the hydrogen scales.
Yeah.
Right, which brings you back to where you were in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. And he used to say, you know, that there's a certain kind of process that occurs at each level. So you can take something of a crude nature and refine it into something that serves another purpose in the domain of your life. But, you know, when people claim ownership on something they can't own themselves, then you get a kind of a club, right? I mean, you look at the Freemasons, yeah? What kind of ideology sits at the back of their minds when they consider even priests are mostly Freemasons? You know, well, the Pope is one. That's just a well-known fact. Imagine that. He takes his cloth off and goes down the meeting. Yeah, kind of weird, isn't it?
Okay.
You know, so who are you dealing with on the Sunday? The Pope or the Freemason? Yeah. You understand what I'm saying here? Because there's an ideology and belief behind that that's secondary to the event of their disposition in life, what they pronounce in life. When they stand at an altar and make a sign with the power of all of those that are there present, yes? What gives them the right to do that? Except the people who turn up there. But what are they? They are what? Members of the audience, aren't they? The flock. Is that what you are, ladies and gentlemen? You know, sheep. And Pierce is your shepherd.
No.
You do realize what that means. Eventually you're going to get eaten, because you see, the trouble with sheep is they tend to learn things, and then they say to you, you know, because this shepherd, you see, he sells the odd sheep here and there, and they, you know, if you do the job, like, you know, chop them up for you, if you pay him enough. And then the sheep went up to him one day and said, "Here, we've heard that you sell us to people, but you chop us up first." He said, "No way. I don't do things like that. No, never, never, ever, ever." He said, "How can I do that anyway? You're all lions. Look at you. How can I get close to chopping you up when you're lions? You'd eat me, wouldn't you? You know?" Oh, right. And so, like a lot of sheep, they go back to being sheep again. See, isn't that how life gets you? Right? How do you stay awake in all of that?
I want to do something. I need to do something in this, because I promised that this would be a long run, and then we would pause, and then we would jump into this. And so I want to take it from the standpoint of, there's an enigma, a mystery. Hi, enigma, if you're here. There's an actual enigma here. If you look, I want to tie this into where it goes next, because you get to this point of, like, what's the future of this? Where can this take you, right? And so you see, we started here in the very beginning with the 768, and we get all the way up to this point in here where we have this final shock, and we've decided that this may be the place where the way comes into it. But here's the problem. Here's the mystery. At that level, we're already at hydrogen 3, and there's only a hydrogen 1, and I guarantee you that there is no such thing as a hydrogen 1 or a hydrogen 0.75 or a hydrogen, you know, 0.33333. So where do you go from there? Because considering that a way enters your life here, it's going to start a new octave, isn't it? It's going to sound the note of do, just like everything else. This is re, but what happened to mi, fa, sol, la, si, do? Where does that happen? What, in other words, what do you become in this? And there comes a point in time in this universe where it can no longer contain you, where you have to actually transition through this bridge. And I've drawn it this way, although this is not entirely accurate of the process. But it's like, you know, you come into this universe and you have all of this elevation and revelation and development and return to one's natural self and enhancements and attendance and presences and everything that accompanies this. And it's like a downward funnel that gets more and more and more and more and more compressed. You can't get past one here, right? Then you become, you kind of enter into another universe. And the way I add it up is not like, we're in this universe and then we go into another universe that's just like this one. But I think you enter the octave or enter the region of perhaps becoming useful to God in creation and what that stands for. That's the third time I've used God today. You become useful to that which causes everything. Does that make sense? This is the leap. This is the leap I want to take, because it's no good just saying, walk alongside me on this development journey that I'm a part of without knowing what the destination is. If
Well,
you
the
don't
first
know the
leap
destination,
that science, Pierce, the first leap that science says occurred was there was nothing but single-celled life forms on this planet.
yeah,
And then out of nowhere, there's multiple life forms,
yeah,
all acting as a single unit.
yeah,
So it leaped from single-celled life to multiple-celled life.
that's the way it works.
And
Absolutely.
then another one took place a little bit later on. And they can't understand how this really did happen, but it did. And thank God it did, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And that was that it went from cold-blooded life to warm-blooded life.
Right.
That was the second leap. Huh?
Yep.
And then the third leap was that it suddenly decided for itself, because everything up until that point was completely responsive to a planetary signal for its life behavior, form, everything.
Yeah.
So at that moment, something very crucial for us took place. What you're saying there.
Mhm.
Right?
This ties so well
Stood
in.
up.
Huh?
It stood up,
Yeah.
made its own choice, its own
Yeah.
decision, right?
Yeah, we have expressions like that, right? Stand up for yourself. That's a shift in
Pick up thy
optics,
bed
isn't
and
it?
walk, right? That's the saying that goes with the awakened life, isn't it? You pick up thy bed and walk. Yeah, stop mucking about and get on with it. This kind of thing. Yes,
Exactly.
motivation, whatever you like, etc. So
Yeah, I mean, where I'm going with this though is that it's no good to, well, let me rephrase it this way. If you don't know where you're going, any direction you travel is the right way, right? But if you're trying to get to a particular destination, then there has to be a particular way to do it. I can't just randomly walk outside my front door and say, I'm going to go to the store and then just, spin the bottle and walk in a particular direction and expect to get there. And so that, to me, is what is meant by a way. And I find it extremely interesting that it has never, ever been called anything other than the way. There's always secondary and tertiary names that go with it. But if you look all the way back through history, as far as you can possibly look, every time this has made an appearance on the planet, those involved with it have always called it just the way. They didn't need to name it anything. Taoism, the original name for Taoism was the way when it was live. JC said, I am the way and the truth and the light, right? This is the way. Every single thing, it names itself when it shows up on this planet. Anyway, that's my leap into the next octave, because I think it's not a matter of showing up in another universe. It's like the mirror image of this one, right? There's a Star Trek where Spock has a beard and everything. You know what I'm talking about? You seen that one? Doesn't matter. But it's it's a becoming useful at that point, in service to something greater, and having that interrelationship. And quite frankly, I am thankful and humbled and blessed and everything else to have found this, and ultimately to be food for angels, if so be it. Food for,
why do you say angels?
it's a colloquialism that I'm using. I'm not actually referring to actual angels. I just mean food for something higher.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by that.
Well, you're one of them, aren't you?
What one of what?
Higher person.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's insulting for others to hear that, because if they don't know what they are, right?
Yeah.
Because it pouts that we have something behind us that we're not talking about, or something like this. But I think the problem is there's so much of it, as you said earlier on, it's impossible to speak on more than one thing at once. And,
True. Yeah, very
so
true.
it seems like you're trying to hide, you're hiding something, but you're not. It's just, you can't, if you had 15 tongues and everybody had 15 possibilities to comprehend something at once, we'd do this 15 times quicker, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Whatever it is we're doing, that is.
Well, it also is quite obvious to me as I've walked this path that it's a web. You can't really talk about one thing without referring to everything else. And that's one of the most amazing aspects of this work, is that it's also interconnected. If there's a piece that doesn't fit, it's probably because you need to work it, or it's wrong. It's one of the two. If it doesn't fit, if it doesn't follow the laws of creation and the universe, then it's not right. Because you can't have an expression here without following the laws. But this is why it seems like this topic or this work is so vast, because we don't start from the leaves and work our way to the trunk. We start from the trunk and work our way to the leaves, because the laws are the trunk. The laws are what all of this has in common. And quite literally, if you put yourself in the laws and you make them part of your core, part of your essence, part of what is you, then you can literally branch off into any of these topics and know exactly what it means without having to go, read a book on tarot or astrology or religion or, We approach it the other way around. And that's what a way does. A way approaches it the other way around. A way is the axle upon which everything else turns.
You know
In my
what?
estimation.
Tell you what worries me is whether or not that at the end of my life there is any point in my existence here. You ask people, do they know why they're here? And you get no answer, or you'll get a makeup, right?
Yeah.
And that's because we're not what we should be. So we're not where we should be, therefore we are not doing what we should be doing. And because of that, we're not only half of the stuff working in us. So the whole point of doing this work from this standpoint, the study end of it, is to start reinitiating those processes in ourselves, because we find an apparent purpose for them. You can't just work on the fact that how are you going to recognize anything that you see or come to know about that's outside of your normal comprehensive ideas of things, ways of things, right?
And yet it gives more than you put into it, with my experience.
Yes.
You put a little bit into it and you get a lot
And
out of it.
mountain of it back, that's right.
Yeah. And that's very confirming, actually. What a blessing. And I don't mean this in a low stance, but from a high position. What a blessing that it does work that way. Because the biggest question, the biggest danger, honestly, that we have if we want to be on a spiritual path is, what if we're on the wrong one? Because you can look on the internet and find a million gurus all out there teaching something, wanting people to buy into something, sort of thing. And
There's more than spirit. There's more than spirit. What about love?
Well, who's love?
It's a dodgy. Well, who's divine?
Love?
Because divinity, it begins. You see, divination, then the practice of divination, divinatory, and which leads to divinity, which means that somewhere up the bar of creation is going to be someone who is divine, and divine is the final end of that divinatory process. See, So there are divine entities in creation.
Yeah.
Now I can understand them calling them gods, because wouldn't you? Well, I mean, what would you be able to do if you were divine? But they're not actually the boss. Creation is. So how about the idea of changing one's God?
Changing
Because
one's
as far
what
as
into a
I'm
god.
concerned, I mean, God's an elemental. There's an elemental called God. Really set the camera. What happened to that ideology, by the way?
I just wanted to show these folks how clever I am at dodging it.
Yeah.
Just kidding. No, we can.
Right.
Yeah, we can go back to it. Go back to it.
When you look at the story, right, in the Old Testament, I mean, the Jewish nation were warring people. Look at them now. They can't help themselves, can they? Come on, seriously. If anybody likes a good brawl, it's some guy with little twistles and a funny hat, and he's ready to cosh you to death, because they're like that. You go to New York, and you try arguing with the local rabbi there, he'll kick you one. I mean, they're like that. This is the nature of their culture. But they were involved very much in the elemental nature of life. And a lot of what's written in the Bible is an occult. Sorry, Iona, this is not a personal issue, all right? No, just so you know, I'm talking about your brethren there, you know what I mean? Eh? I mean, like a good, a good Torah now and again. See what I mean? But how are you going to get around the point or the problem of coping with such knowledge, coping with such things? Because that's what you come to. You come to truths in this way, which is to explain something about the way itself, truths which undo what you thought you were, which undo what is so-called a permanent truth that now becomes a lie, because you've lived according to that truth as you saw it to be, but the true story of it is something completely different. And then you begin to see that the greatest writings in this world weren't how they have told you the truth of it. They're about something else. They're about other domains and natures and events of humans' association with other life form on this planet that was here before the human, and things of this kind. So this is what you learn to come to terms with in yourself about what kind of a depth of mind or feelings you actually do have to be able to contain such things, including the energies, forces, and contents that come along with it. You grow as an entity of self. I mean, Pierce is extremely powerful, man. You wouldn't want to make him as an enemy, really. But you won't come up to that, because that's not his purpose of life. I mean, I know he did martial arts for 40 years, but I'm not talking from that point of view. I'm talking about from the standpoint of the truth of life and the reality of life that comes along with it. So your life begins to become meaningful in another way, because your life has purpose now, especially when it comes to reconstructing yourself back to your original self, your true form of life. I mean, what's the meaning of quality? The only meaning of quality that actually is that something that is made according to its true design. Right? Isn't that cool? I mean, you say this is no quality at all. They didn't make it as they should have done. It's not quality of life, is it? I mean, your quality of life is also about what you actually are in it, isn't it? Too? Yes?
Makes you wonder how many people on this planet could be classified as quality from that criteria, or from
That point of view, not so many.
Sure.
Not so many. It's not that something is fussy, but it can't deal with anything that isn't what it should be. I mean, you can't run a car on water because you have some idea that it will work, whether anybody likes it or not. I mean, how many times do people do that with their lives as well? And they come unstuck. Yeah. If I'm looking nice, it's because you're all flying around on my screen here in different positions. You're doing a great job, you know. You listen to this man. Because now you've got to do something with it, haven't you?
Well, you know, the invitation's always there, because whether you do or don't, I'll still be doing the work in a way, always. Yeah. And and this is one thing that I very much want to emphasize again and again and again and again and again, because we're brought up to think of things like teachers and, you know, professors and all that kind of nonsense, and that's not what I am. I am only a custodian, and what I mean by a custodian is, you know, here in America we call the school janitor the custodian, right? We also call someone, we also call someone who, you know, curates after a museum, who looks after things, a custodian. And there's such a huge distinction between that, because the thing about this man Pierce is that he will continue to be custodian for this no matter what happens, right? That's why it's here. And so come watch the show, come join the show. You know, it's like joining the circus, but yeah, it's not a teacher-student type of relationship.
But that means also, therefore, then, that you are a man with humility, right?
Well, you have to, in the face of the universe.
One of the first issues of humility is the ability to stand under something greater than yourself without taking personal offense.
Yeah.
Because it isn't about you, it's about something bigger than you that you become.
And that's how you guarantee reincarnation.
I'm not talking about being humble and groveling. You know, you can do that, go to some curry chewing guru and grovel and pay a lot of money for it too, you know. But it doesn't get you there, does it, in the end? It doesn't mean that you walk out the new you. Right?
Well, that's the thing, right? Who wants to know how to absolutely 100% guarantee their existence after death? It's really simple. Do you want to know?
Yeah, I do.
100% guarantee, right? What a salesman, right? Who could?
Is this a joke?
No, it's not a joke. No,
all right, I'm just asking. It was only, you know, light-heartedly. You know, we've got to keep this light-hearted as we really get.
No, it is a joke.
Where's the tissue box? I need another box. I've got one here, just in case. You know.
No, the way to ensure continuance, whether it be reincarnation or incarnation into another realm or whatever, is simply to be useful to creation. If you are useful, in other words, if you take on the problems of God, then that's where you're going. If you take on the problems of creation, that's where you're going. This is how you ensure your continuation. It's as simple as that. Now, doing it is not so simple, but you know, if you worry, I'll tell you a story. I was such a weird child. I was about 10 years old, and somewhere in my mind, I got it into my head that I was a reporter for God, a reporter.
Reporter for God.
A reporter for God. So I literally,
a Russian spy, you mean?
I walked around in school with a notebook, right? And I would jot down everything that I heard and everything that people said. And I would walk around in Pearl Street Mall in Boulder, right? And I would like jot down things that I saw. And because I had it in my little mind at that point in time that God must be so far away that it cannot see what's going on down here. And therefore it needs someone to be able to tell what it is. Yeah. But what that did is it put me in a position of being able to take on those kinds of worries. Now, I know that's an odd thing for a child to do, but it's also, I wish we had more of that kind of thing in our culture today, because if we did, if you're objectively seeing that as though you're trying to report it to the big boss, then you're taking on those problems. And then the next step in that is, how do I make a difference? Right? How do I change what isn't right about this. So, but yeah, take on the problems of creation, and you are absolutely assured that you're continue to be useful. It's not so hard. I just solved every religious conundrum in 3 minutes.
You gave us another one instead. That is,
Yeah.
what is creation's problem then?
I wanna, Pierce, I wanna say, I wanna do a little bit of counter to that.
Please.
I don't know if it's a counter, just a different point of view. Be careful of how much you give, who you give it to, and what you give it to, because you only got one you. Like I did that a lot earlier on, and I got almost nothing in return. Now you might say, what you're getting in return is your value for creation is what you're getting in return, and that's fine. Just something like, this is quite a lot that you're taking on, and
Yeah. But here's the thing, Sachin. Here's what's probably not apparent is that I'm not doing it for you. I'm not doing it for people in general. I'm actually doing it as a service to creation, not to the individual. And so, for me, when I finish this sort of thing, this is how you know if you're working right or not. If you do something very forward, very, very hard work, what they call in the culture hard work, most of the time you come away from it feeling exhausted. But if you're actually engaged in something like this, you come away more charged, more regenerated than when you started. And that's how you know if you're doing it right. If you come away from an engagement with somebody who is just there to take from you, whatever it is, steal from you, your core, your essence, your knowledge, your wisdom, whatever the case is, and you walk away feeling exhausted from the encounter, the problem's in you. Not you specifically, but the problem is in you from the standpoint of you are doing it to try and prove something as opposed to doing it to try to improve something. Yeah. So I understand what you're saying, Sachin, but it works a little differently for me in that regard.
yeah, I think what you described is what our culture defines as the difference between work and passion.
Yeah.
Are you a
Are we
passionate
passionate?
man? Yeah,
I knew
yeah,
you were gonna say that.
yeah.
You got it right on.
It's I knew you was going to say
Things
that.
are
This is passion. This is not work. It's not work, because if given the choice of anything to do, this is exactly what you would do. So this is not.
Sachin, what is your ideology of life?
Oh, now you're in the hot seat.
No, he's just offered himself up on the execution block, hasn't he? I mean,
No.
come on, think about it. Think about what.
No, I don't have to think about it, because I can cop up. I can just say I'm not Pierce. I'm not at this point where I've thought about it enough. I haven't done the work yet. I haven't done the work to go think through this. I have an ideology in my mind, but I'm not ready yet.
Well, it's a good place to start. Is now, isn't it?
That's also humility.
Yeah,
That was
fine.
also humility. Because that's actually very rare in this world to find somebody who can say, oh, I haven't done the work of it. Most people are like, bah, I know that, right?
Yeah.
I know that already. You're not saying anything new to me. Maybe you just articulated it better, but you never, show me anything new. And it's nonsense, right? So thank you. That's actually quite beautiful, Sachin. Thank you. So here's the thing. I have a meeting directly after this, and so I need to keep a promise to myself and the other party that I will keep this at a 2-hour type of meeting this time instead of letting us go over. And we're about a minute up there, so yeah. Was this useful? Was it something of value today?
Yeah.
Okay, good, very good. All right.
Excellent.
Well,
Absolutely worth turning up for, Pierce. Most definitely. Wouldn't you agree?
yes.
I put that down as a good one.
Well, I'm
the
pleased
good
that
ones
I also-
outrank the bad ones. You're doing well. That's a good one.
Yeah, just
Because you've got a sense of well-being at the end of this, and that's what you should have.
Yeah.
I've never ever known it not to be like that. That you always end with a sense of well-being in yourself because of it, right? No matter the struggle, Pierce, and ideology behind it, Pierce. I'm not going to let you go on this. You know that, don't you?
No, I know.
Next week, we will get an answer. What do you think?
Just keep coming
The
back.
whole
Just
week,
keep getting
ladies
that
and
answer.
gentlemen, for the
Next week you'll get the answer.
$72,000 question, right? Do you remember that show?
Yeah.
But if you
$64,000
failed, you've got a
question.
big set of encyclopedias. Here, go and stick your head in that for the rest of your life, right? Or $72,000, wasn't it?
$64,000, I think it was. $64,000 question.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
All right. Good morning, good evening, good night, good afternoon,
See you
wherever you
around.
happen to be
You know
in
where to
this
get hold of everybody. See you.
part of the
I'm
world.
out. Well done.
And,
See you.
We'll
Cheers.
speak soon.